Thanks for joining us for CBN NewsWatch. I'm Mark Martin. It's what millions of Americans and Jews have been anticipating for decades. The United States of America recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. President Trump is taking a victory lap today after making good on his campaign promise. CBN's Jennifer Wishon has more from the White House.
By recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and moving the U.S. Embassy there, President Donald Trump has secured his place in history and demonstrated another reason why Americans elected an outsider who isn't beholden to tradition.
We cannot solve our problems by making the same failed assumptions and repeating the same failed strategies of the past.
After decades of failed peace negotiations and a continuation of violence, President Trump says it's time to do something different.
It is time to officially recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel.
For decades, Democrats and Republicans running for president dangled the promise of recognizing Jerusalem, only to fail to follow through once in office. President Trump delivered. He says he's just acknowledging reality, that Jerusalem has been Israel's capital for decades, and kicking off a new strategy for peace, while reaffirming that the U.S. would support a two-state solution if that's what both sides agreed to.
Above all, our greatest hope is for peace, the universal yearning in every human soul.
Immediately, enthusiastic praise poured in from a diverse group of evangelical leaders. President Donald Trump did what his predecessors didn't have the courage to do, former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee says. In doing so, he set two great examples: how to make good on promises and how to treat your friends. The historical record, empirical fact, and our faith all confirm that Jerusalem is in fact the capital of the Jewish people. I therefore enthusiastically applaud President Trump's decision, says Reverend Samuel Rodriguez. It marks the beginning of a new season in U.S. Middle East policy, says Bishop Harry Jackson. The previous administration allowed persecution, terrorism, and stereotyping of the Israeli people. President Trump called for a continuation of the status quo at Jerusalem's holy sites.
Jerusalem is today and must remain a place where Jews pray at the Western Wall, where Christians walk the stations of the cross, and where Muslims worship at Al-Aqsa Mosque.
With the president's announcement, architects, engineers, and planners will begin work on locating and building a new U.S. embassy in Jerusalem. It will take some time to complete, but the president says he's building a magnificent tribute to peace.
And that was Jennifer Wishon reporting there. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu led a chorus of Israeli officials praising and thanking President Trump.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu led a chorus of Israeli officials praising and thanking President Trump.
This is a historic day. Jerusalem has been the capital of the Jewish people for 3,000 years. It's been the capital of Israel for nearly 70 years. President Trump, thank you for today's historic decision to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital. The Jewish people and the Jewish state will be forever grateful.
Just minutes after President Trump's decision, which was 8 p.m. Israel time, the city of Jerusalem adorned the walls of the old city behind me with a projected image that said, December 6th, Jerusalem applauds President Trump.
I think, if anything, this move will further and bring peace forward, since our neighbors have to realize that in any scenario, Jerusalem is the capital of the Jewish people.
But Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas condemned Trump's decision.
Trump's decision tonight will not change the status of Jerusalem and will not give any legitimacy to Israel in this issue, because Jerusalem is a Palestinian, an Arab Islamic Christian city, and the eternal capital of Palestine.
The PA called for 3 days of rage, while a chorus of voices in the region echoed the Palestinian Authority president. The IDF reported rioting by Hamas, and Hamas also organized this march of anger. Turkey's President Erdogan said Trump crossed a red line and called for an Islamic summit next week to discuss the decision. Turkey's foreign minister warned it threatened the region.
This is an extremely irresponsible and wrong statement. Not only do we not accept this statement, we strongly condemn it because this kind of statement endangers the region's stability and security.
Yet many evangelicals applauded the decision. Mike Evans of the Friends of Zion Museum in Jerusalem unfurled a banner that says, "God bless Trump from Jerusalem, D.C., David's capital, to Washington, D.C."
We believe what he did is going to bring the blessing of God on our own country, America.
Evans compared President Trump to another U.S. President, Harry Truman, who 70 years ago, against the advice of his own State Department and many advisors, recognized the newly declared State of Israel. Evans believes we're seeing prophecy come to pass.
And as somebody that's wanted and prayed and hoped for this for more than 40 years, I see us in the middle of prophecy right now.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
And joining me now from Jerusalem is Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell. Welcome, Chris.
Great to be with you, Mark.
We've heard concerns surrounding the embassy move. Any tensions or violence so far?
Well, there has been reports of violence and riots in Hebron, about a 45-minute drive away from where we are. The Palestinian Authorities called for 3 days of rage. And so we're expecting actually tomorrow on Friday prayers here for Muslims in the city of Jerusalem, possibly disturbances around the old city, around Damascus Gate, for example. As we have reported, the Turkish President Erdogan is calling an Islamic summit next week to discuss the situation. So people are concerned about the violence and disturbances, but also mitigated by the fact that they might not last as long as some people expect.
What are the next steps, Chris, to actually moving the embassy?
Well, one of the things, and this is part of, I think, the strategy of President Trump, is it could take a long time, months, even years. We have about 1,000-member embassy down there in Jerusalem, in Tel Aviv. So it's going to take a long time to find a location for a new embassy, to build that, and then make the move. So I think part of the strategy of President Trump is the fact, let's go ahead and start moving the embassy, but it might take a long time, and that might mitigate some of the opposition to moving the embassy over time.
What advice do you have for Christians as far as how they should be praying right now?
Well, obviously, the book of Psalms in chapter 122 says, pray for the peace of Jerusalem. So I think that would be one of the first things, to pray that peace would remain in this city. I think also it says, I think in the second book of Timothy, that Paul encouraged Timothy to pray for those in leadership. So pray for wisdom for President Trump, Vice President Mike Pence, for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, as well as that the Lord's hand, as it were, would actually be on the leaders here in this region, including Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian Authority President, President Erdogan. So, Lord, I think it would be really incumbent on Christians to really pray into this situation. Prayer can make a difference. There was a famous book by Derek Prince many years ago that history is shaped by prayer and fasting. So I think it's really an encouragement for Christians around the world to be praying for this situation.
Amen. Prayer does make a difference, and God in His mercy does answer our prayers. All right, Chris Mitchell, our Middle East Bureau Chief, thanks for joining us, sir.
Thanks, Mark.
In other news, Minnesota Senator Al Franken is expected to resign from Congress today after a majority of his fellow Democrats in the Senate have called for him to step aside. Franken and Alabama Senate candidate Roy Moore are both accused of sexual misconduct. While Franken may pack his bags and return to Minnesota, Republican Moore insists he will not drop out of his race. Moore may even win the special Senate election next week. Gary Lane has that story.
Only a handful of Democrats called for Al Franken to resign after this groping photo surfaced. He apologized, but at least 7 more women have now come forward, accusing the Minnesota senator of sexual misconduct. By late Wednesday, even Franken's closest Senate colleagues joined fellow Democrats in the call for him to step down.
And I get no pride or pleasure in saying that.
I think today's revelations just further add to a fact pattern here that's just unacceptable.
Franken's expected resignation comes just 2 days after John Conyers, The longest-serving African American in the House of Representatives resigned because of similar allegations. Senator Kirsten Gillibrand spoke out against Franken and sexual misconduct by members of Congress.
We need to draw a line in the sand and say none of it is okay.
With a majority of Democratic senators now turned against him, the former Saturday Night Live comedian knows an increasing number of people believe his conduct is no laughing matter.
I know there are no magic words that I can say to regain your trust.
In Alabama, it now appears that Judge Roy Moore has regained enough trust from voters to possibly win his Senate race next week. A recent Washington Post poll shows 6 in 10 white females in the state are likely to vote for Moore. That despite allegations that Moore sexually assaulted at least 2 teenage girls more than 30 years ago. And a CBS News poll shows Moore leading Democrat Doug Jones 49 to 43% among likely voters. President Trump and other Republicans are standing firm in their support of Moore, despite the allegations against him. As for Democrats, at least in the cases of Franken and Conyers, they are speaking out against sexual misconduct. Gary Lane, CBN News.
Christian actor Terry Crews is among the list of honorees for this year's Time Magazine's Person of the Year. Crews is one of the many celebrities and activists who turned to social media in the Me Too movement. Me Too is a social campaign that puts a spotlight on sexual harassment in the workplace. In October, Crews said he was assaulted by a high-powered talent agent in Hollywood. The Brooklyn Nine-Nine star is the only man to be interviewed for Time's cover story. A gay man who was denied a marriage license by Kentucky clerk Kim Davis is seeking to replace her. David Ermold announced his candidacy for Rowan County Clerk Wednesday. Ermold and several other gay men applied for marriage licenses in 2015. Citing her Christian faith, Davis said she couldn't in good conscience issue the licenses because she believes same-sex marriage is wrong. She spent 5 days in jail for her stand. Davis said she plans to run for re-election in 2018. Several other candidates are also planning to run against her. Australia's parliament voted to legalize gay marriage. The bill defines marriage as a union between 2 persons. It should become law in about a month. Churches, religious organizations, and existing ministers are not required to perform gay wedding ceremonies. However, ministers who are licensed after the law passes will have to perform same-sex wedding ceremonies or be in violation of anti-discrimination laws. Australian lawmakers rejected amendments to the bill protecting freedom of speech and religion. The wind and wildfire danger in California has hit an unprecedented high. The state has a color-coded system showing how strong the winds are expected to be to fuel the region's powerful wildfires. That system has pushed into never-before-seen territory into purple, which means extreme. The state's fire director says it means winds could reach hurricane strength at 80 miles per hour. 90,000 acres burned in Ventura. People returned to their neighborhoods to discover their houses are nothing but rubble.
I'm grateful we have our home, but I'm very sad for my neighbors and the way my neighbors look, and it's just horrible.
Authorities ordered tens of thousands of people to evacuate because of the 3 major wildfires burning in Los Angeles and Ventura counties. They've destroyed nearly 200 homes and buildings. Their heart goes out to them. Well, coming up, Brits living under the fear of terrorist attacks may very well fear being called racist even more. See why you have to be very careful what you say in the UK. Europeans continue to live under the threat of terrorism and wondering when the next attack will come. But among their leaders, there seems to be more concern about stamping out so-called Islamophobia than about the threat from radical Islam. Dale Hurd reports from London.
The British Parliament went into emergency session, urging Prime Minister Theresa May to cancel President Trump's planned visit to Britain next year. One MP even said the American president should be arrested if he sets foot on British soil. You might have thought Donald Trump ordered the sinking of a British battleship or insulted the Queen. What Trump did was retweet videos of alleged Muslim violence from a British fringe anti-Islamization group that the British establishment detests. While many considered the president's tweets a bad idea, especially since the factualness of one of the videos has been disputed, the whole episode showed again that the British establishment is obsessed with so-called hate speech, even more, some say, than the threat of terrorism. One response to Muslim radicalism in Britain has been to attack the critics, as if criticism of the problem is as bad or worse than the problem itself. 3,400 Britons were arrested last year for online hate speech. That usually means people who criticize Islam. Almost 10 times the number arrested for terrorism-related offenses, while British police have had to let suspects of other crimes go because of cutbacks. At the root of it all, say officials we interviewed, is the belief that criticism of Islam is a terrible thing. It's called racism, even though Islam is not a race.
Racism is the kind of 21st century equivalent of being accused of witchcraft in the 17th century. You're guilty until you're proved innocent. And of course, the process of proving innocent may well destroy you anyway.
Gerard Batten is a member of the European Parliament for UKIP, the UK Independence Party.
But you see, our political establishment is terrified of being called racist or Islamophobe because it's one of the worst things you can be accused of. Because once you've been labelled that and it sticks, that's the end of your career. You're not going anywhere.
The same British government that has devoted more money and manpower to stamp out criticism of Islam online dragged its feet when investigating a huge rape gang scandal involving mostly Pakistani heritage men who preyed on as many as 1 million mostly white English girls. The same government continues to allow the existence of Sharia courts and has hosted radical Islamic events on government property. We filmed this Palestine conference, which included known anti-Semites and terrorism supporters, at the government-owned QE2 Center, the same venue where a Christian conference on traditional marriage was banned. The other Trump tweet that miffed British leaders was when he told the Prime Minister she should care more about the terrorist threat facing her own nation. Then police this week uncovered a plot by Islamic terrorists to blow up 10 Downing Street and kill Theresa May. British police and MI5 are said to be monitoring 20,000 potential terrorists. There have been 5 terror attacks in 2017 alone that have killed more than 30 and injured hundreds.
Every day I fear another terrorist attack.
Raheem Kassam is Breitbart London editor-in-chief and author of No-Go Zones.
This is the new normal for us. Every day I wake up, check my phone and see where the latest terror attack has been. And yet we're still pulling this pillow over our head saying, la la la, we can't hear you, we can't figure it out, nobody knows what's going on.
Peter McElvenna, an aide to Lord Pearson in the House of Lords, called the amount of time the British government spent debating President Trump's tweets madness. But he told us the British establishment can never admit that Islamic culture is a threat to safety and to a free society.
I thought in Manchester, when you have a bomb with children, that would really shock people. And it did shock people, but again, there is a fear of addressing what may lie behind it.
So if it can't stop the message that Islam is a threat, it will go after the messengers. The British government seems almost obsessed with what it calls social cohesion. Think of it as government-enforced social harmony, backed up by the police. It's an attempt to keep a lid on boiling social tensions. But the social tensions are still there. And that means when it comes to criticism of Islam, or even the superiority of British values, free speech in Britain is gone.
If anybody was to talk about the superiority of British values over other people's values, they'd probably find themselves arrested and on a charge of racism or Islamophobia. And I'm not kidding. You have to be very careful what you say in Britain today.
Something we were all reminded of when the American president sent those tweets. Dale Hurd, CBN News, London.
Up next, want to relieve stress? Perhaps why science proves being generous is good for your health. Giving is important. The Bible tells us to give, and believe it or not, doctors now agree. Overwhelming evidence proves generosity is good for your health, from preventing cancer and heart disease to building self-esteem. Lori Johnson brings us more.
If you want to live a longer, happier life, doctors say become a giver.
Several recent studies show generosity triggers a number of significant changes, all good, both mentally and physically.
For instance, researchers from the National Institutes of Health studied MRIs of people who gave to various charities and found chemicals released in the brain strengthened their immune systems. The Cleveland Clinic's Dr. Michael McKee says giving reduces stress and lowers blood pressure.
There's a release of endorphins. These are the kind of magical chemicals that come from various areas in the brain, and they flood throughout the system. They're cousins, basically, but some reduce pain, some kind of seek out sick-looking cells and exert a healing effect on them. They have many different positive effects.
Dr. Stephen Deutsch is the chairman of psychiatry at the Eastern Virginia Medical School. He says doctors commonly use giving in treating depression.
We encourage people to not be so self-absorbed and to think about others. We even tell people to practice being concerned and invested in other people.
He says the more people give, the easier it gets. So people who feel powerless or worthless find new purpose and value by seeing their actions help others, and they tend to live longer and healthier lives. Lori Johnson, CBN News.
It is better to give than receive. We'll be right back with more of NewsWatch. VidAngel releases the pilot episode of its new series, The Chosen. It tells the story of the first Christmas, and director Dallas Jenkins calls it the most important film he's ever made. Visit CBN News to learn more about the series. Well, that's it for now on CBN NewsWatch. You can find more of our exclusive coverage of the issues you care about most at cbnnews.com. Also, tell us what you think about the stories you've seen here, and you can do that by emailing newswatch at cbn.com, or be sure to talk to us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Hope you'll join us next time. Have a great day.